Tell us about the seminar. Who was there and what were you discussing on the renewable front?
The principal focus of the seminar was about the renewable energy programme in South Africa, which goes by the name of REFIT. The speakers were bankers such as myself, lawyers from the law firms, plus also some academics assessing the issue of renewable energy in South Africa.
What sort of programme do we have in place at the moment? Because of course we know we have new power stations coming on board, or on stream. Those are going to be coal-fired power stations, and we've had a lot of emphasis on coal power. Do we have enough emphasis on renewables?
This is something that's receiving an increasing focus from the stakeholders. At the moment there's roughly about 875 megawatts of renewable energy planned under what's called REFIT 1. Probably about 725 megawatts of that will come from the private sector, probably about 150 from Eskom. But there are numerous reports and comments that as the government develops the integrated resource plan through the course of this year, the renewable energy target will increase dramatically.
Of course, we know that coal is still in abundance in South Africa. Many other African countries like Nigeria have abundant coal. This is a much cheaper source of energy. Can we afford to go for renewables?
It depends on how you look at it. I mean, certainly from a perspective of building plant 30 years ago, coal was very cheap. But in terms of the cost of new build coal in South Africa, our understanding generally of the Medupi and Kusile programme is that coal is not as cheap as it used to be from just the capital expenditure. Also at the moment, the externalities of coal are often not factored in. Emissions of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide and consumption of water. When they're included in the calculation against renewables, which on the whole don't emit CO2, SO2 or consume water, then the calculation is more nuanced, and certainly most countries have come to the decision that renewables is a vital part of energy policy going forward.
Well, we would like about 15% of our energy coming from renewables by 2020. Is that a realistic target?
I think we would say yes. I mean, two parts of the country are highly suited to wind projects. That would be the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape. And certainly there's every prospect of 3 to 4 gigawatts of wind in those areas. And likewise solar. South Africa has some of the best solar resources on the planet, better than Nevada or Israel, for example. And it's easy to foresee over time perhaps as much as, say, a gigawatt of solar, although that will move more slowly than wind given the slightly less maturity of the technology.
Why do you think we haven't moved on these issues sooner, just given the resources we have, the sun and the wind, and everybody knows about the Cape Town wind, don't they?
I think really it's a legacy of the same other power issues that the country is tackling. They are all being tackled in a sequence. It's not something that's been ignored. It's just the change that's needed in energy policy takes time to work through, given the almost sort of sea change in the country's power requirements from that were in place, say, 15 years ago.
What sorts of opportunities are there for the private sector in all of this?
There's quite a number of them actually. Under the REFIT programme is explicitly targeted at independent power projects or IPPs. There's various opportunities from an equity investment side. There's obviously financing opportunities for the likes of ourselves as bankers, but also contracting opportunities. Perhaps not supplying wind turbines, for example, in the first instance, because they come from abroad, but certainly contracting operations and maintenance. And there are very large localisation opportunities for local players and especially BE entities as well.
How about the return on investment? What sort of return on investment would you get from being an IPP?
These are a product of the tariffs that are set in the market, which are known as feed-in tariffs, specified prices. These have been set by NERSA to include a reasonable return on capital. What's often slightly misleading about the tariffs when people compare them to, say, other countries in Europe is South African interest rates are structurally higher, and also the rand is slightly volatile. So the prices will always appear more expensive than they are in Europe, just purely because of the interest rate differential. But on the whole, the tariffs are broadly seen as competitive, and the market will obviously give its view in time.
And do we have the financial resources at this stage to start building our renewable base?
Certainly from our perspective as Standard Bank, we would say yes, and I'm sure our counterparts in the other banks would say yes as well. Really, all that's needed is for the documentation to be finalised, a power purchase agreement, and if you have a state known as bankability in our jargon, then we see every opportunity of lots of project financing.
How about elsewhere in Africa? What sorts of moves are being made in other countries for renewable energy?
On the face of it, there are quite large opportunities in many African countries. If you are, as a country, dependent on diesel power, which is the most expensive of all, you can afford renewables. The challenge is in many ways similar to South Africa, where you have to get the legislation and regulations right to allow private participation. But once that is done, we see every possibility of renewables in countries such as Namibia, Botswana, Kenya, among others.
And how about cross-border participation? Are we helping each other with these projects?
This is always one of the harder ones. Jean-Francois was just talking about the European Union, where the lack of cross-border cooperation has been evident on many occasions. In the African context, this is particularly challenging because there isn't an African Union of the same scale of the EU for 50 years. But certainly in respect of transmission projects, we're seeing quite a bit of activity at the moment.
Of course, in the meantime, we still have carbon credit trading. How's that market growing at this stage? Because you're also active in that market, aren't you?
That's correct, we are. Like all the market participants, we were slightly disappointed with some of the progress from the Copenhagen summit last year, although clearly carbon credits remain on the agenda, and we are excited by the medium and long-term prospects in Africa.